Well, this discussion was overdue. Let's talk about track picks. So traditionally speaking, competitive Mario Kart players have always been judged by their unoriginal selection of kart combinations online. However, if they should be judged for anything, I think they should be judged for something completely different: their track selection. So why is this the case in my mind? Well, selecting an optimal kart setup actually helps a player win. When it comes to track picks, the optimal strategy is not nearly as straightforward, yet for some reason we sit and pretend that it is. What you see on screen now is a stats page taken from my friend Ido's website. This site allows users to submit and track their race results in ranked lounge matches, or the online competitive ladder. This page in particular takes all the race data from the site's active users and displays what tracks are being selected in their matches. The numbers are simple enough. A little over 5% of all races recorded are played on Excitebike Arena, which does not sound like a lot, but consider the fact that it is played over twice as much as 90 courses in the game to really start setting the stage here. It is actually insane for a track to be played on average once every 19 races, because the theoretical limit should be once every 12. So while 5% isn't a super large percentage, the theoretical cap should actually only climb to around 8.3%, or 1 in every 12. Additionally speaking, there's a repick rule in competitive matches, so this means that if Excitebike Arena is selected in the first race of a match, it's not allowed to be selected for the remaining 11 races. This means that Excitebike Arena is more likely to appear in any event you play as opposed to not, and the same is true for Mushroom Gorge and DK Summit as well. The three stadiums trail close behind on the rankings, and then there's a little bit of a drop-off. Now this list has a little bit of bias. For instance, I'm pretty sure these races were compiled by mainly English-speaking players, and this block of players might have their own set of preferences. Players are more likely to pick courses that their friends also like. In a sense, it's kind of like certain culture exists within the world of Mario Kart track picking, which makes sense considering so many players also play 6v6 in teams. However though, each player in a lounge match only gets on average one track of 12 selected per match. 12 races, 12 players, it makes sense. So the vast majority of the data on the site is still coming from a decently random sample, the tracks that the player that submits is not actually picking. But the big question is, why are things this way? Do we just not have unique opinions? Well, one might initially think that certain tracks are just better than others, like with vehicles. So let's first consider some of these popular lounge tracks. A lot of these courses have unique elements to them. Excitebike Arena is a track that is different every time you play it, making it harder to master. DK Summit's a pretty difficult track that has the famous double shortcut, and Mushroom Gorge not only has the gap jump at the end, but it's a pretty nasty counterpick track to choose against bike players. Mario Kart Stadium has the motion glider at the end of the race, and DS Wario Stadium's 4 coins after the first turn makes it a pretty ideal course for players starting in first. I think a common thought process is that these types of tracks would be valuable to learn and master as a result of their properties, and if people are going to practice these specific tracks, it would be reasonable to expect that they might want to pick them online to take advantage of what they've practiced. But as more players started picking these courses, it almost became like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense. Players needed to learn these courses not just because they could be useful to pick online, but because they all eventually became so common that it has just become necessary to know how to play them if you even want to survive in the lounge to begin with. So one would think that the best way to get use out of your practice time is to just get really comfortable on the tracks that you know you're going to play a lot, because doing so would theoretically result in you becoming good and comfortable on most of the tracks you play. But I don't actually subscribe to this theory, and for some reason I feel like the online community is almost stubbornly leaving out a key ingredient to the art of selecting tracks. And I just have one question for you all. What exactly is the advantage of picking the tracks that everybody else is already solid on? So you might have trained yourself to be pretty good at Mario Kart Stadium's motion glider, for instance. But if it's also true that everybody else also has likely realized that they needed to learn this strategy, practicing it is not really a matter of getting ahead, it's a matter of keeping up. And if you're expecting to play certain tracks, any serious opponents you run into will have the same outlook as you. This exact situation effectively erases any advantage you might have when picking this track to begin with. It almost sounds stupid to say out loud, but not everybody can win on these courses, guys. Like, if everyone is a specialist, then nobody can be. And even if there was a biker in your room as well, would picking Mushroom Gorge be good for you individually if 10 other people are also still very familiar with it, that also have no vehicle disadvantage? Some of you might have a little bit of a rebuttal. What about a track like DS Wario Stadium? It's surely different than Mario Kart Stadium because the advantage doesn't stem from an ability to do a strategy, but rather from your starting position. And I understand this take a little bit more. Wario Stadium has a rather sharp first turn followed up by 4 coins barely out of the normal racing line. What it all means is that first place can get a massive coin advantage early on and pull away really easily if they go untouched. But let's be honest for a second. Is this a super reliable strategy? Well, in 6v6 or with teammate support behind you, I would agree, but the lounge is a little bit of a different beast. 70% of the time you're going to pull a coin first set, which leaves you vulnerable. But it might even be more of a disadvantage to not pull a coin because you won't have the speed to get to the string of 4 after, and that can result in you getting bumped wide, and if that happens, well, the entire plan's kind of off the rails. But even with the coin, you can be instantly hit by a green shell or a red shell from a player behind you wanting the coins for themselves, or you might even get banana sniped on the first ramp, or even pushed wide by a player who had a clean path to shroom tide of the 4 coins to begin with. And if any of this happens and you get off your spot, your entire advantage is already gone, because this track has been a competitive staple for a decade now. Everybody knows how to front run it. Yet, this might not be true for other courses. So what does it mean? Does it mean you shouldn't spend time practicing these tracks? Well, of course not. Sometimes you just gotta roll with the punches. It's not like the lounge's track meta is going to change overnight, and it would be negligent to not be ready for the most common tracks. You of course need to practice these tracks to be viable in the lounge. However, if you actually want to take advantage of your track picks, then I can't really endorse picking a bunch of tracks that your opponents are probably more than ready for. It doesn't make strategic sense to pick courses in this way. There isn't much of an advantage to be had. This is why I'm also a hater of people who just pick random in competitive matches, because at the end of the day, I think there is likely a best option out there for every player, and if they knowingly aren't taking it, then I just feel like they're not trying to win, or do whatever it takes. And those who don't seek these options out, whether that be due to a lack of caring or just not having their own original thoughts, well, it kind of bothers me. Because genuinely speaking, I think our game would be more diverse, more enjoyable, and even pushed further ahead if it wasn't for a stagnant, kind of lazy mindset within our own player base. So my mission today is going to be a continuation of the first Rook View episode ever. It's time to try to get people to think differently about what tracks they pick. Now I promise you guys, I'm not saying this to say that my tracks are the ones that you guys should actually be picking or anything, but let my experience be an example. So as many of you know, I am a Waluigi pinball fanatic, and there are many reasons why. I find it to be one of the most aesthetically pleasing tracks in the game, as well as one with a really cool theme, but I also appreciate how it plays. It is a course that emphasizes having good racing lines, yet will still keep you on your toes due to the pinballs flying around everywhere.
John took first place again. Is he on? Oh no, it's Rookie! Of course he is!
I find that even when things go wrong, even without shortcuts, there are still plenty of avenues to get yourself back into a race. There are plenty of decisions to make at all times, and even plenty of traps to avoid, some of which top players still frequently fall into. I am one of the few people that spam picks this track in lounge regardless of what position I start in. Yet, many people don't like that. It makes them kind of uncomfortable, and guess what? That's the entire point. You're my opponents, and I don't want it to be easy for you. I've been messaged about it before in DMs during matches. I've seen tweets from some opponents emphasizing the despair they go through when a partner asks them to pick the track. I've seen people call the track trash in the room chat. A few weeks ago, I played in the highest room of the hour, and I was in over my skis, playing players ranked higher than me, and my track pick actually sparked a conversation, and then this banger got dropped. Like, what is this? This came from a higher ranked player than me, and the statement's absolutely ridiculous. Like, guys, the pinball patterns are entirely consistent. Writing this up and pressing send tells me everything I need to know. It tells me that this player has not stopped for 5 seconds to question how things work here. It tells me that unlike the lounge standard courses that always seem to come up that everybody's ready for, that not all my opponents might be ready for this track. It tells me that my strategy is good, and if you want me to stop, then you all can start by no longer being free money on it. The initiative is yours. If I have a track where I would average 130 an event on if I got to play it every race, you bet I'm going to keep picking it. And the reason why I average 130 on it is because I can win in literally any way. It's not like Wario Stadium where I need to front run it through and through. I'm comfortable doing that, but I'm also comfortable in my ability to come from behind, and I'm confident that I will make better decisions than my opponents typically do. Playing specialized courses just puts you in environments that you're more familiar with than your opponents, and these courses are out here for anyone. You just have to look for them. I wasn't lying about the tweet earlier, by the way, and this is so telling to me. In my mind, this really just displays the laziness of the community. If I know that my opponents aren't going to practice what they're terrible at, why should I stop picking it? I almost see this like a fighting game. You should pick the option that keeps working until the opponent proves that they have the counterplay. But the sad reality here is that I don't think that the culture is going to change unless we really start talking about it. Because I don't think lounge players actually think about their strategy very much. They have not considered that the common track picks are actually giving them an advantage. For me to stop spam picking pinball would also come with the expectation that they should stop picking Excitebike Arena. Ideally, the whole game could start to get explored if no tracks were truly left untouched. But the average lounger seems to just not care. They queue up and repeat their process as always, hoping that the result is just different than the last time. Ordinarily, we would call this the definition of insanity, especially when the losses start coming in droves. But the truth about our game and community is that we're a little bit delusional. We play a game with a luck element to begin with, but 80% of players also mindlessly select 2v2 at the start of every match, a format in which how your partner does is actually more important to your rating than the luck you receive in the same match. And it's not like you get to choose who your partner is either. Perhaps this is worth another rant later on, but the point is, playing a bunch without making any notable changes to your game or strategy will always eventually result in you having a luckier stretch than normal. It's just how math works. A strategy not being optimal does not mean that it will not work at times, but players will always assume that they're doing everything right when that lucky stretch finally hits. And this is where the negative reinforcement happens. The losses stop temporarily, and as a result, our strategy must be sound. So let's continue picking Excitebike Arena and questioning everyone who dares to be different or something. This is why I value Ido's site quite a bit, because it reiterates to me that I'm not actually crazy, and affirms some thoughts I've always felt were logical. My opinion is that bad tracks don't really exist, and that this community is actually just lazy and resistant to change. We saw the worst of this mindset during the Booster Pass era, with people constantly dogging on the new tracks, claiming the original 48 were better, etc. And look, there's nothing wrong with preferring the original tracks or having preferences, but there is everything wrong with complaining about track picks before ever considering if there's a hole in your game. And yes, that even goes for bagging tracks. Everybody is unique and has different preferences, so what any of us see as bad is completely subjective to begin with. For instance, there are tracks I really dislike, and I have very specific reasons as to why I dislike them. But calling them outright bad as an objective fact would feel wrong of me. There are probably people watching this video who have a favorable view of what I've said up to this point, because I've attacked courses like Excitebike Arena or Mario Kart Stadium for being overpicked. In the LAN scene in particular, we actually don't see many of the common lounge courses selected to begin with, and I think there's almost like a counter movement in a sense that resists a lot of the popular lounge tracks. But this idea is not, quote, fixing a problem, rather it just shifts it somewhere else. Because at the end of the day, the community is still judging what's good and what's bad as fact rather than opinions. So what happens when someone disagrees with the standard? Well, some people do. Notably, I remember last year in the MomoCon finals, my good friend Greg picked Donut Plains 3 in a pivotal race near the end, and for some reason this was controversial. Now, DB3 is one of those tracks that I find bad. I'm not big on SNES courses in general since I find them to usually be pretty bland. I don't enjoy the strategy of the track really, nor am I really a big fan of its strats. I've even joked with Greg before that the track sucks, but I will absolutely defend his decisions to pick it time and time again. At the tournament, many people asked, why are we here? I mean, the track isn't popular, maybe it makes some players uncomfortable even. But again, that's the point. So why are we here? Well, probably because someone has a reason to want us to be. Maybe it's because Greg's actually good at it. Perhaps it would be throwing if he didn't try to get it picked. And the stats show it. Donut Plains 3 is literally an ace up his sleeve in this exact format. So, at the end of the day, regardless of what tracks I find to be good, the mentality of trying to gatekeep courses to begin with feels weird to me. Because it straight up goes against game theory, strategy, analytics, whatever you want to call it. So I do wish we could consider this. We should be embracing specialty picks instead of booing them. Because even if one course is not your own personal cup of tea, the logic behind picking said course will likely make sense for the person selecting it, and it keeps our game more fresh if anything. More creativity makes for a more enjoyable community experience in my mind, and perhaps this mindset can motivate some of you to finally pick up a track that you've wanted to TT for a while, with hopes that it could be a game changer one day for you as well. So yeah, when the casual players call us lame for picking the same combos over and over, maybe I don't vibe with it as much. But I absolutely do when I think about us playing a select set of tracks in a game with 96. There are a lot of tracks out there to explore, there's probably a lot of untapped potential, and I feel like we're doing ourselves a disservice if we're not trying to unlock it. Anyways, I love sounding all positive, but there is a little bit of an elephant in the room here, and I know some of you remember the times where I've been a hater before. So to those of you who remember my Baby Park video or might be thinking about it right now, this all might sound rich to you. How could I sit here and defend every track in the game when I've made a video making a ban case for one in particular? Well, the main reason comes down entirely to intent. Greg on one hand picks Donut Plains 3 because he wins on it. Baby Park on the other hand is usually picked without any winning intentions going into the pick whatsoever. It's why it shows up in last race situations so much more frequently than any other time, and why it's picked so often by people who are clearly on tilt or are just there to troll. If a player is serious about wanting to pick Baby Park due to their own personal skill on it, that is someone I would not judge for the selection at all. I might dislike it, it might make me uncomfortable, but if they actually are producing consistent results on it, who am I to hate? I might be a little bit of a skeptic on how it's done, but hey, results are results. So this is a pretty loaded topic in general. I'd like to get into talking about 6v6, but I think that there's enough there to warrant a follow-up video, and we're already kind of running long now. So if you're interested in that, make sure to subscribe and turn the notifications on. But for today, let's have a quick recap before I sign off. 1. When practicing, it is good to be prepared for the tracks you expect to see. Of course, this makes sense. 2. This doesn't mean you should necessarily be the one who picks the courses you expect to see. Rather, you should be picking courses where you have the greatest advantage. 3. Yes, some tracks have unique quirks that make them more favorable as running courses, but player skill is typically going to be much more of an important factor in performance on a track that people aren't really considering right now, especially in free-for-all settings. For example, one of my new friends is a former Mario Kart Wii champion who's new to this game, and he happens to be a world-class DK Mountain player. It's the only track he's put a significant amount of time into and time trials up to this point, and in a setting where he's expected to get one track per match, I must ask, even if he practiced Wario Stadium a bit, does it make sense for him to ever use his track pick on it, as opposed to simply selecting a track where he gains 3 to 4 seconds a lap versus his average opponents? I think the play here is kind of obvious. 4. In an ideal world, the track picking meta should constantly be shifting and adapting to new playstyles. If this is not happening, you can take advantage of this. On a side note, I've suggested for a while that I'd like Lounge to implement some queues for lesser played courses, but admittedly, it shouldn't have to be this way. It just comes down to how much players are going to naturally change themselves. Strategically speaking, the incentives are already there. And 5, what I've talked about today applies at practically any level. I have witnessed lower ranked players have specific tracks where they are able to compete with higher ranked players. I have even seen recently some of the top Lounge creators change their minds on courses after giving them further attention and exploring details that they might not have considered before. So in conclusion, it is important to note that with a game that results in many differing opinions, there probably isn't some objective truth. And if someone is telling you that this is the case, they're probably just echoing what they've already heard or haven't put much thought into strategy themselves. For those who do pay attention to the Lounge leaderboard, you might know that certain vehicles trend in the server, almost in direct response to one of the game's top players. This player is of course someone who tries to innovate. He is someone who is very talented, but in a sense, if everyone just follows his strategies or even track picks, the ideal settings will always be there for him. Imagine a world where your 5 best tracks are just played every single match. This would of course be a massive advantage to yourself, so ideally, you shouldn't want to create this world for your opponents either. So unless you actually just genuinely love the common courses the most, I recommend challenging yourself to find alternatives to pick. I challenge you to make life harder on your opponents because that's in the spirit of competition, and I implore you to find new ways to get results and to really pay attention to what is and is not working for you. Maybe you like the status quo. Challenge it. Maybe you hate it and agree with everything I've said to this point, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have alternatives that are ready yet. So go out there and go find them. Finally, if it helps you out, I've included the link to Ido's site in the description that allows you to track your placements and the courses that you've played, so go check it out, and I hope to be back soon discussing the 66 meta's longest lasting track myths as well. So thank you everybody for watching today, and I'm excited for part 2 to come out at some point in the near future.